Can you confirm, Tom, when it started? Okay, thank you very much. And good morning, everybody, members and officers, and particularly any members of the public who are listening to us. And welcome to the second Partnership Board Annual General Meeting this morning. It's always good to get together and look at how the Joint Local Plan is actually performing for us and what it's doing for us and what it will carry on doing for us in the future. Now, this morning, we're going to look at the authority's annual monitoring report in draft form at the moment. That will be presented by the Joint Local Plan team, and then there'll be an opportunity for discussion and questions. But we want to end that promptly at 11:45 so that we can move on to the climate emergency planning policy and guidance, which again will be presented by the team. But I guess that this is what's going to have the most interest for members, because this really is quite an innovative thing that we're trying to do. And officers will be explaining to you how far they think we can go. And we are pushing the envelope really as far as we dare. So it'll be quite an exciting presentation. Anyway, I'm going to hand over to Jo Lee now, who heads up the Joint Local Plan team for the monitoring report. Over to you, Jo.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here again this year with you all. I think Joe Perry is going to share the screen with the presentation, and we're going to take you through some of the key points. We're not going to go through it all. I would like to just say initially thank you to all those involved in making this a digital tool and moving it to a data format. It's been a huge effort. So particularly a thanks go to Tim and Phil in the city planning team, and Ed Mannings, who joined the team, our Joint Local Plan team in the summer, who's been working really hard on this. I'm going to hand over to Ed in a minute to start setting out, what it is and what we're doing. But it is worth just pointing out that we are still double checking it, and we're going to be making changes to ensure that it's correct as soon as it's published, hopefully after this meeting, once we've got your agreement to it. We are also aiming to evolve it further and ensure everything is now published, is available as a web-based tool rather than a document. So we're going to give you some highlights today, and over to you, Ed.
Thank you, Jo. So I'll just take you through some of the headlines. So just the Authority Monitoring Report, sometimes called the AMR, provides an annual update on the performance of the strategic policies of the Joint Local Plan to date. So this year, the AMR represents the second year of full monitoring of the plan and covers the period of the 1st of April 2020 to the 31st of March 2021. I'd note that the 31st of March is the cut-off date for the year's reporting, so data after that will be recorded in next year's report. As you can see on the screen, the changes to this year's format have focused on usability, so prioritising the use of simple graphics and explanations, providing access to an interactive web app to provide an overview of progress on our land use allocations, and a new dashboard feature to provide an overview of our performance measures in a single location. Next slide, please, Jo. So there are 28 measures covered within the report. For the purpose today, we'll just discuss 3 headline areas. So next slide, please, Jo. So firstly, the measures with the most potential to be impacted by COVID, where there is up-to-date information. So for this reason, we haven't included visitor spend because the latest statistics are still pre-COVID. But we will cover the impact on travel, the impact on construction, and the impact on retail vacancies. Next slide, please, Jo. And Jo Lee will also take us through an update on the delivery of homes according to our spatial strategy, including the delivery of affordable homes and the future supply of land for new homes. Next slide, Jo. We'll also consider statistics regarding our carbon emissions when considered against the Joint Local Plan target of halving our annual emissions per capita by 2034. So next slide. So to start off with travel, the impact of our indirect impacts, I should say, of travel associated with COVID-19 have been well documented in the media. Joint Local Plan seeks to promote rail travel as a sustainable mode of transport with the number of passengers at stations using an indicator as success. It is clear that passenger numbers in the monitoring year have been impacted by the pandemic with reduced services, lockdowns and increased patterns of working from home. The reduction of rail passengers of 71% across all of the authority area is lower than the national average reduction, which was at 76% across the country. We monitor the number of passengers by ferry to support our understanding of Plymouth's strategic connectivity. Similarly, the impact on ferry travel has been impacted, with international services halting during the pandemic. Next slide, please, Joe. In terms of construction, despite the impacts of COVID-19 to date, we're generally on target to meet our identified policy requirements. There is some uncertainty in certain areas of the built environment where there have been large changes to consumer behaviour and therefore impact on markets for different types of floor space, which will need to be monitored as we continue to emerge from the pandemic. Such trends could particularly affect the future build out of office and non-food retail planning permissions and increase the potential for applicants to seek alternative proposals on sites for existing permissions to meet identified changes to market demand and online sales models, which will need to be monitored. Next slide, please, Jay. In terms of retail vacancies, there are two separate stories in the AMR. Like most cities throughout England, Plymouth city centre has struggled during the COVID-19 pandemic. High vacancy rate and shrinking retail frontages highlight the need for a new vision for the role of the city centre as we emerge from the pandemic, while accounting for the flexibility afforded to new and emerging changes to planning laws. Plymouth's vacancy rate of 17% is consistent with previous reporting, but also consistently higher than the reported national overall vacancy rates. In terms of our main towns, which should have a more local catchment area, have shown a strong level of resilience during the pandemic, with only marginal increases to vacancy rates in Kingsbridge, Tavistock and Dartmouth on pre-pandemic levels. The next slide, please, Joe. So just to highlight some of the challenges and what a lot of work, the focus of a lot of work going forward is, it's within a new context. So the way we consider employment uses and retail uses has changed this year with changes to planning law. So this funky diagram hopefully will help explain it. But while intensive industrial and storage and distribution uses remain separate employment entities, former B1 employment use classes, which are office, light industrial and research development, are all part of a far broader use class together with retail and other uses. These uses no longer require planning permission to change between uses within the same category, Class E. This has implications for decision making and monitoring targets in future years and will be subject to much work emerging from the pandemic to create an appropriate strategy within any plan review. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'll just hand over to Joe to speak about housing.
Thank you, Ed. As Ed said, we've seen considerable activity this year and we're on target to meet the overall joint local plan requirement of 27,600 houses, as well as over 10,000 that have already been built. There are also 14,700 which have already got planning consent. So this means we have a really robust land supply and we're passing the government's housing delivery test. You can see there 128%. And the 5.8 years worth of deliverable housing land in the supply. Importantly, we've also got 83% of new homes that have been built on previously developed land in Plymouth. And market demand has been particularly high in the thriving towns and villages, resulting in strong delivery of 675 homes last year, which is the highest that we've seen since 2014. But as we all know, that is putting pressure on affordability. It's also worth reminding members at this point that the joint local plan and its policies are the starting point for decision making, and all decisions need to be taken in accordance with the plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. I just think it's worth reiterating that. If we can have the next slide, please, Joe. So while it's worth remembering that completions monitoring is really helpful, what happens is that the homes that are still being built are reflective of the permissions that were granted before the plan was in place, and particularly when there wasn't a 5-year land supply. So as you can see here, the Plymouth policy area continues to be the main location for new homes. with the focus for growth on Plymouth and the main towns, and that's totally in line with our spatial strategy set out in the joint local plan. We have looked at a little bit more detail at what's been delivered in the countryside, and interestingly, more than 70% of the homes that were built in that countryside were through conversions or change of use. We've also looked at garden development, and note that only 2% of new homes have been granted on gardens in the Plymouth policy area, and only 4% in the thriving towns and villages. Can we have the next slide, please, Jo? This year we've seen a number of, over the year 2014 to 2021, we've seen near 1,800 new net affordable homes being built. But it's really important to note that as this year, 2021, has seen 253 losses, and I'm going to talk about that due to the regeneration schemes in Plymouth. Importantly, though, there's sufficient supply within the plan to meet our affordable housing targets in full. And since adoption, we've secured permission for 342 new homes for social rent and 224 new home ownership products, and that's entirely in line with our policy and supplementary planning document requirements. We've also looked at what's been achieved on qualifying sites for affordable housing, and almost all greenfield sites have delivered 30% on-site affordable homes, which is also in line with our policy requirement. And only 2 sites didn't reach that, but one of those would reach 29% due to viability, and the other included an extra care facility. Securing affordable housing has been much more challenging on previously developed sites, and 30% has only actually been secured on those where there's been public funding. And we're going to be continuing to monitor the level of affordable that's being achieved and compare that with our policy targets. You can see some of the photos there give a bit of an example of some of the really good schemes that we've had in Elmhurst Court, Dartington, the Stepping Stone Apartments. We've got Pilgrim's Court there, which is development of a derelict unused site with 12 new build flats for adults with learning disabilities, and was an Abercrombie Award winner this year. And we've also got, you can spot the people in the photo there, Sterling House, which is a Plymouth site, which is being started for veterans. Can we have next slide, please? It's worth talking about the considerable regeneration that's occurred within Plymouth, both across North Prospect but also Barnbarton, and that's seen 253 losses last year. And it's expected to deliver 258 homes, new affordable homes over the next 5 years. And this is a really significant affordable housing project, and one of a number that we've seen over the set out in the plan over the plan period. As Ed mentioned, we now have an interactive map-based tool so that everyone can search your area and find out what the current position is on the allocated development sites. And we hope members and the public, as well as officers, will find that useful. And we're aiming to update that every year once the housing position statement is available. Can we have the next slide, please? One of the most significant sites in our joint local plan is the Sherford New Community. As you can see here, it makes provision for 5,500 new homes at Sherford beyond the plan period, and currently performing really well